This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known. Welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Kirsty Gilpin and I discuss a lesson each week from our Math Map curriculum used by families enrolled in Classical Conversations. Today is Wednesday, November 5th. Hard to believe 2025 is almost over. And I just said the wrong date. It says Wednesday, November just 5th. I didn't say that before. Anyway, so we're looking forward to Kirsty, the unusual things we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks through the holiday season, where we can take a break from some of our regular lessons. But meanwhile, let's finish this year off.
Welcome. Of course, the 5th of November, I always think of remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot, Guy Fawkes Day. So, but that's not what we're here for. We are here to talk this week about lesson 15 and assessment. But first, as we do every week, even though it is Blue Book Week, it is still a good week for flashcards and practicing the grammar. And especially as we talk about, right, next week we're going to be talking about lesson 16. But as we talk about that period of time between finishing community in 2025 and picking up in 2026, flashcards are a really great way to continue to practice and have those math conversations during that break time. And it may be a great time to play some games or to do some different things. And so I was thinking about copy work, and you can certainly give your students and your younger students perhaps some of the flashcards and some paper and say, just copy them. And that would be certainly okay. But I was thinking that in this period of time, it's a great time to think about stick in the sand, right? So if you live somewhere that you end up on a beach, whether that's at the ocean or a lake or the playground, right? Literally picking up a stick and drawing symbols in the sand, right? You maybe have the flashcards and you draw them for the kids, or you show the kids and have them draw them. I have some really fond memories. I know that it sounds kind of hokey that we did this, but when we lived in Florida, we would go to the beach and my kids would do their blob maps on the sand, right? Because it was a great way to incorporate some kinesthetic learning, being at the beach while still doing our schoolwork. So you can incorporate that there. I called it nature walk expression, but I was thinking that just going for a walk in the woods or going for a walk in your yard or the park, wherever it is that you like to go for a walk with your students, look for some ways that you could use nature. So it might be practicing fractions. Maybe you find some berries and you can put 2 berries in a stick and 3 berries, right? To express 2/3. So if you were looking at your fractions flashcards, or maybe you look for things where you can add or multiply, right? Maybe arranging some things from nature outside, or just looking for some of those notations and seeing if you can find some notations, some things that look like that, kind of like when you look at the clouds and go, okay, well, what math symbol could that be? So just using some different ideas. And then certainly everybody's favorite is to use food, right? So we've talked about you could use cooked spaghetti because it's nice and manipulative, right? To make some of the symbols, or you could use some hard spaghetti with marshmallows, right? You could do some different things there to, or of course, everybody's favorite at Christmas time is to make Christmas cookies and give your kids some frosting, right? And make some math symbols on your cookies for Christmas. So those are some ways that I was thinking about how could we have fun with our flashcards during this time and continue to practice this idea of reading math, right? We were just talking about that math is a language and reading math, how important that is. And so how can we continue to practice that? But while we're maybe having less formal school time.
I loved your idea about the edible. So last year, my Challenge A class, I brought everybody a stick of sugar cookie dough, and they made their own math symbols with their little thing of dough. And then they could decide after they put their hands all over it if they wanted to eat it or if they just wanted to throw it in the trash. But I saw that idea somewhere, and so I stole it, and they loved it. And so they still practice notations, so still assessment, but then they got to eat it if they want to, and then they got to play with it and get it all over their hands. And so I love that idea.
Those are very fun ideas, and I'm not a super fun person, so I'm really glad for those. But I thought of something else when you said copy work that might not seem quite so fun, but I've noticed in my youngest that he doesn't get a lot of experience using a piece of notebook paper, the right direction, organizing things in line, like he uses the computer for a lot of stuff, and he's got workbook, his little math map for math. So I think it would be good practice. I don't like being nitpicky when I see him I'm like, don't write in the header, you need to come down but this could be a place where just a short period of time where he's copying some flashcards, and I can be very specific about how he organizes it on the page, and then we can move on. It doesn't need to be a fight that I have every time he gets a piece of paper out, but just practicing the skill of being organized with your.
That's a perfect thing to practice, Janet, because you're right. I think it's easy for us to forget as homeschoolers, little things like organizing a piece of paper, or where do you put your name on a piece of paper. And so for our students who maybe go off to college or to some more formal learning experience, helping to prepare them to use their resources that way is helpful. And I mean, we're starting to see, I think, in some of the articles that I've read that we as homeschoolers, right, are preparing our students well for not using AI and not doing everything on the computer. But we're also starting to see that more and more colleges are saying that we are going to have handwritten assignments. We're going to have assessments where they're not using their computers to do them. And so preparing them to know, well, where do I put my name on the paper, I think is helpful. So although flashcards are a normal part, and we're going to talk about our cover, this is kind of where we're going to diverge after this, because our Blue Book week is different. And so we're still going to be able to talk about our cover because every booklet has a cover. And that brings us to our our canons of rhetoric and looking at those. So I did pick kind of a specific question related to the art this week for Memoria. And that was saying, looking at this, right, it's called the ballet class. And so we're thinking about a class experience. And so asking your students, what might ballerinas have to remember? And then you could pick, right, in a class setting, right, whatever your particular students' interests are, right? So what does a martial artist need to remember? What does a Lego builder need to remember, right? If they happen to be a baseball player, what do you need to remember as a baseball player? So what are those things that when we're assessing, right, part of that is assessing what we need to know. What do we need to remember? And so encouraging our students to think about what is it that they need to remember for assessment? And then you could take that, right, continue to ask those questions if you want to. Well, what does a mathematician need to remember when we're thinking about, right? Think about all of these different avenues where we may have an assessment to help our students think about the value of their memory. Also, when we think about assessment, right, we're thinking about what have we done previously, what do we want to remember, but we might also want to think during a time of assessment, what skill don't I have that I would like to have? What is a new skill that you would like to learn about? Right? So when we think of invention, it's that idea of something new. So pulling from all these things that we've learned, is there something now that you said, I'd like to learn more about this, or I'd like to gain this new skill? Always, when we look at our art, we can look at our art and think about what the arrangement of the art tells us. In this case, you might say, well, who seems to be in the center of this piece of art? Who's the focal person? Why, what does that tell us about that person because of where he is? And so it seems like that ballet master is sort of in the center of those girls. So there's an arrangement there of, there's an attention on him leading the class. So asking our students, what does the arrangement tell us? How does that tell us who the main characters are, or what the setting is? What's more important? Are the people more important? Is the setting more important? Those are some questions that are arrangement related questions. We've talked before about just the style of the cover. What does it tell us about the lesson? How does it prepare us for the lesson? So that could be the art choice. It could be something that's related to our quotation or our reflection or the title of the booklet. As we look at the booklet, how does the style help to prepare us for that lesson? And then with our assessment and our blue book, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about why neatness matters. When you're delivering something to me, why does it matter? Just as Jana was talking about how she wants to help her students to learn how to organize their work and arrange their work. Neatness is a part of that. Why does that matter? Delivery is so much about how we communicate our ideas to somebody else. And so having that conversation during our assessment week, I think really helps to reinforce that for our students, that that's important. Does anybody else have anything from this cover or covers in general that they'd like to share?
I love the fact that they sign their name and it says, I'm doing this work for the glory of the Lord. And I like to do this one first on Blue Book Day, just because I think that sets the tone for the rest of the day when you're agreeing to do all of your work to the glory of the Lord, the best of your ability. And so I love that that's on the front page at the bottom for them to sign.
I'd like to piggyback on what Babs just said about doing your work for the glory of God. And last year in my Challenge 3 class, one of the students, after seeing this on the assessments, she was taking the SAT again, and she said she was able to go in with greater peace because she was doing it for the glory of God. She said, it's for him. It's all for him. And her score increased, and she had a much more peaceful approach. And it was such a blessing that something so simple, like what you just said, Babs, it made a difference. And it's those little things that when we point them out to our students, that impacts such big things.
That's really beautiful.
I was gonna say, I like the idea of having them sign it. And what was I? Oh, I was gonna say that one thing I discovered that is unique to my child is that I cannot do math first. Because she's going to use up everything she has on math, whether it's at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And so if I do math first, then she has nothing left. But if I do math last, then she feels rejuvenated because she feels like I'm going to be done when I'm finished with this. And that was something I had to learn because literally for years, I was like, let's do the hardest thing first because that's kind of what I thought it was supposed to be. Sorry, I didn't realize I didn't have my camera on. But now I recognize that like each student like now I'm just more convinced that each student has kind of little nuances that we can cater to a little bit to help them do their best and do their work to the glory of God for real. So I thought I would just mention that.
Great. So this is where we're going to diverge because after the cover, you just have the inside front cover is still there, but the rest of the book is a blue book. It's a blank book, and we're going to talk about the different page types. But there's no invention page, there's no memoria and arrangement page, there's no careful calculations page. So we're not going to talk about all of those today, but I thought first we would talk about what the goal of assessment was. And there's a lot of things that we can get from assessment, right? There's a lot of goals that we can, but for me, my ultimate goal was to raise students who were able to self-assess themselves accurately. Because I'm not always going to be there to ask the questions, but they will be. And so as I was thinking about it, thought that students who can accurately self-assess are going to attend well to their studies and to their relationships. Because self-assessment isn't just something that we can do about our academics, but everything in life. If we're taking time to rightly assess ourselves, and that is really when we think about where am I measuring up scripturally, that's going to not just be our studies, but their relationships, everything that they're doing. And as they do that, they're going to build ownership of their learning and their behavior, because they're not going to need me to tell them where they've fallen short. They're going to be able to rightly assess that for themselves. As they gain that ownership and practice self-assessment, they're going to develop the discipline, right, needed to exercise freedom responsibly, make those noble choices, and lead well. And I actually was thinking about these benefits of accurate self-assessment independently of the themes of challenge, but then I realized that that's really all I was coming up with, right, was the themes of challenge. And so when we think about assessing our children, I think if we think in terms of how do we help them learn to self-assess, it maybe can put a little bit of a different picture on why we're doing it and how we do it, because it's not just a test where we're giving them a grade, but we want to model for them, how do you assess? We want to model for them, how do you set a goal and then compare against that goal? We want to model for them, what are some good questions? We want to model for them humility and how we assess ourselves. And as we do that, I think we're going to help them grow not just into lifelong learners, but into people who are going to be able to accurately self-assess themselves and make noble choices, to lead well, right? To have self-discipline, to own their own behavior, to be able to attend well. To all of the things that they're doing. And I think just wanted to encourage us to think about that, because then it makes sense why, right? Why would we do a blue book with our youngest students? Well, we're maybe not doing a blue book with our youngest students because we want to make them go through and answer questions, but to start this process of understanding, what does it mean to assess? What does it mean to look back and celebrate what you've learned, but also to look back and think, what could I have done better? And I think that we can start that with our youngest students in a very gentle way in order to prepare them to dive more deeply into self-assessment and developing that in the challenge years. Anybody want to chime in with anything here?
This is kind of an aha moment, I think, for me. And I was just thinking about this weekend, just where you have attending well to their studies and to their relationships. That is such a hard skill. And I feel like I'm still learning that, like how to assess relationships and studies too, because I am in school. But I think showing your students, like, when you mess up, how do you handle it when you get something wrong, whether it's in a book or whether it's in a relationship, like whatever it is, they're going to be watching how you handle it. And so I just love that this kind of bleeds into not just book work, but just life in general. And that's something I really, really do want to show my kids, my personal kids, well, the ones I teach too, but the ones in my household, that they have the ability to assess their relationships. They are smart enough, they know how to do this, right? But they just have to spend some time to think about it, right? To assess.
It's many years ago now, but when we moved in relatively shortly after we moved into our house, so that's how I know it was quite some time ago. I read an article about using, is it 1 Corinthians 13? I think it's first or second, the love chapter. And the suggestion was that you use this to assess the people who want to be in relationship with you. And I think that the article I read suggested that for a girl, for example, and you're in a relationship with this, young man, are they loving you well? And here are the questions, right? Here's it. But then as we talked about it as a family, I said, this is all of our relationships, but it's not just assessing the relationship and the other people, but it's also myself. Am I loving well? And so we have it written up on sort of chalkboard in our kitchen. And I had planned to use this chalkboard to change out the verses and have different Bible verses, but it's still those verses from Corinthians 13. And they're still there in our kitchen. So it's always in front of us so that we can always be assessing, are we loving one another well? Right. And so helping our students to see what is the standard? What is the standard for love? Right? What does it mean to love well? Well, here it is. It's right here in the Bible. And then looking at that and going, oh, no, that behavior kind of fell short. So.
So we have a very big Challenge A class. My son is in Challenge A this year. It's 12. It's very full. And about week 9, we had a discussion, and I realized my son is stressing over he had to get every geography term right for the debate strand. And I asked him why. I started asking why. I said, well, my team, because in class they were split into teams, my team is depending on me to get it right. And I said, well, what if your team loses? And he goes, well, the losing team, sometimes we boo them. Or I don't want to be on the losing team, because if I make my team loses, then I'm the weak link. And so I'm just thinking in terms of, in light of assessment, it's super important to stress that you're assessing against your old self. Are you better than yesterday? Assessing against the standard of the Lord, not assessing against your peers. And so I was so frustrated that day. I told him, I used a bad word. I said, go find the dumbest kid in that class and love him, love him well. And so I say, mommy cares more about how you make that quote unquote weak link be loved and give him a seat at the table, rather than being the best person and make your team win. And so I guess I'm just trying to think of ways, so any questions I can ask him, because this assessment is coming up, and how do I continue to point him to benchmark against himself and against God's standard rather than his classmates.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. That the world always wants us to compare to somebody else. And it never ends well, because when we compare ourselves to somebody else, if we're better, it's going to lead to pride, right? If we're worse, it's going to lead to envy and jealousy. And that's the reality, right? That you're either going to be prideful because you did something better than somebody else, or you're going to be envious because you weren't as good or you didn't have what somebody else had. And it's really hard because we are bombarded with marketing that is entirely designed to make us compare ourselves to others. But the only standard that really should matter is that of the Lord, right? And so early on when we started working on this, right, Lee would say, well, the standard is perfection because the Bible says, be perfect, right, as your Father in heaven. And so that's the standard. And it's like, but we know we can't achieve that. And that's the whole point, isn't it? It's just like the point of the 10 Commandments wasn't to create a legalistic society. The point of the 10 Commandments was to show that no matter how hard we try, we cannot be perfect. No matter how hard we try, we cannot keep those commandments. We always fall short. And it points us to needing Christ. The only way we can be perfect, right? The only way we can be righteous is to accept the righteousness of Christ, right? Perfection is only going to come through him. So when we compare ourselves to Christ, we get to see a right understanding of who we are in God's eyes and to recognize our need for Christ, not in a self-defeatist way, but in an encouraging way, right? Because then as we recognize our need for Christ and we see what does Christ do for us, well, he gives us the Holy Spirit who teaches us and conforms us into the likeness of Christ. And so that pressure of I have to make myself perfect is off because scripture is pretty clear, right? That the work of the Spirit is to conform us. And God says that's his plan, right? That's what he says in Romans 18 is that he has begun this good work and he's going to complete it. And so there's so much hope when we rightly understand our place against God's perfection. There's so much hope because we recognize that we are not perfect and cannot do it on our own, but there's so many promises in Christ that we will be perfected, that work will be done. And then not to say we don't have a responsibility, and that's where we do compare to ourselves, right? So how can I do better? How can I lean into what God is asking of me, right? So going back to what do we say on the cover, right? Doing this for the glory of the Lord, not for myself, not to check a box, but to bring God glory. So how can I do that? How can I bring God glory through my work? Or the other Bible verse, right? Do as though for the Lord and not for man. So all of those scripture verses help us to go, okay, so how do I do better? Well, let's do this because I want to please God. I'm going to do the best that I can. And then I think as long as we're always bringing it back to scripture, right, that's where we want to be. And so helping our children to assess through scripture and not through the world's eyes is maybe one of the greatest gifts that we can give them because the world is working all the time to tear them down.
I want to summarize some of the things you said with Yating and your Corinthians. So there's also another way that I find very few people look at our interactions with our communities. And C.S. Lewis is one that told me about this, that if we're the body of Christ, every time Kirsty does well or gets something, I should rejoice because it means I also did too. And so this is why we can be good sports. And when someone else wins, we can go, okay, we did it. Humanity did this as, as a body. And I think that's why when you see something like, I'll keep it a sports analogy, but there's some academic ones too, where, somebody's stumbling in the Olympics and the opponent picks them up. And that was the thing that was done best that entire day, not the timing and not the scores. And so we know that in our hearts, but we forget to tell our children to be proud and happy of our classmates when they succeed, because school has set us up, especially if you have a percentile rating system where you're going to fall in as a number among each other rather than as collaborating with everybody. And of course, from that, you can start to see where your own strengths and weaknesses are too, because you have the teacher, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a book or the Lord, you have something that team is aiming for. So I just really appreciate what Yating said about go find that kid that needs loved on, because we're all going to do better if we do that. And that's one thing that's been very discouraging in running classical conversations. And for you guys who are directors, and you have the same feeling when a parent will say to you, well, my child's no good at that, or we're not going to participate in this. And or a student who says the opposite way, that kid's, pulling the class down. We're looking at ourselves. We're not looking at the body of Christ and what is the role the Lord's given us with the community He's put us in. So I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, I think it's encouraging, Lee, that we are in community through classical conversations because we can help one another to do better and to continually push one another to celebrate, together instead of being competitive. So that said, about the goals and why do we assess? I thought we could take a look at the Blue Book and sort of 3 aspects of specific assessment, right? This specific Blue Book assessment. And I wanted to talk about the what, the who, and the how of assessment. The first thing that we need to do is to know what is our goal. If we don't know what our goal is, then we can't assess progress towards it. Right. And so we've talked quite a bit about the freedom we have as homeschoolers to have goals that are not the same as a traditional textbook company or a school system or a testing company, that we can set goals that are different. And it's hard when we maybe aren't always super confident in a subject to say, yes, I'm going to go out on my own and set a different goal. But I think it's really important to stop and say, well, what do I really want, right? At the end of 12 years in my homeschool, what do I want my children to walk away with? And then you can walk back from that, right, to have your intermediate goals. So these are some things that may be a part of assessing towards your particular goals. But I'm hoping that everybody who is watching this is going to have an idea, if you even haven't written them down formally, what your own goals are, that you have an idea what your goals are, and that you can pull from that to develop your own assessment. So first, we keep talking about seeing the unseen. That our ultimate goal is to discover God through mathematics. So how have you done that this semester? What's a way that you learned about God through math? Right? Assess there first and celebrate that. Is there something you want to know about God that you think you might find out in math? Right? What's something you want to know about God? Right. That's a good question too when we're thinking about assessment. And I just want to address the fact that we called lesson 15 assessment and lesson 30 is reflection, because this idea of assessment is know where you are and make your course corrections. By the time we get to lesson 30, we called it reflection because we're sort of at the end of the year. So there's less sort of course correction for this particular year. You may do that for the following year. But here we really want to encourage everybody not to just look back and say, how well did you learn this? But what do we want to do differently in the second semester? Is there something that we want to change? Right. So not only can we ask our students, what have you learned about God, but is there something you still want to learn about God, right? Maybe there's something that there's a question they have that maybe they're going to discover through mathematics. So let's ask that question and then keep that in mind in the second semester. Next, after we've said we really want to discover God through math, notice that our emphasis has been on the learning skills, right? Those skills of learning, our core habits, our common topics, our canons of rhetoric. So how well are your students employing those skills in what they're doing? Can they ask a common topic question, right? So our older students, maybe we want them to tell us how they would use those skills. For our younger students, perhaps it's just asking them a question. Can you write a definition? Can you compare? Right? So we want to be assessing those skills of learning. after we've checked to see, are we looking for God? Are we using our skills of learning? Then we maybe want to talk about our fluency in reading the math notation, right? That's been the next thing that we've talked about in the math map as our emphasis is being able to read math. Before we talk about learning the concepts or computing, can you just read it, right? So that might be the third thing that you might want to look at. The fourth thing, what do we do every week? Every week we look at our math map and we look at our dimensions and we look at our domain, right? So how do our students understand this structure of mathematics, right? What is a dimension? What is a domain? What kinds of things did you learn about in the first dimension? What kinds of things did you learn about in the second dimension? What kinds of numbers did you use in integers? What kinds of numbers did you use in fractions? Then we might look at some of our computational accuracy and our computational speed. Right? So those are some the big goals that we have, right? When we talk, if the math map, if we said what's important, hopefully those are the things that you've heard us talk about. And I tried to put them in a sort of order of what I would say is the most important to the things that are less important. Or perhaps not of primary importance. I don't want to say less, but maybe not the primary importance. So think about what are your goals? And then we maybe don't assess all of these things, but what of these things fit into your goals that you want to assess? Does anybody have anything they'd like to say about what to assess? So once you know what you want to assess, let's talk about who needs to be assessed. And I haven't really, honestly, this is the first time I thought about this because I always just thought it's the students that we're assessing. But as parents, right, this is our math map at home book club. So the first person I really should assess, and perhaps not privately, but with my students, is let's assess the teacher. Right? If we want to model for our students, what does it mean to self-assess? Let's start off by saying, okay, I'm going to tell you what I thought I did well. I'm going to tell you where I'd like to change. And then maybe what did you think mom did well? Or what do you think you'd like to see mom change next semester? So we start off by assessing the teacher, modeling for our students what that looks like, right? It could be your preparation. It could be how you interacted with your students. For your students, right? It might be how much fun did we have, or how many times did we incorporate movement? I don't know, right? There's a whole bunch of things your kids could come up with. But I would encourage everybody to start their time at home by modeling for your students and assessing the teacher. Then let's assess the family, right? We keep talking about the fact that the math map allows us to have a family math conversation. Did we do that? Did we have a conversation every week? Does dad know what we're doing in mathematics, right? Does our older brother who's in challenge 3 know what our younger siblings are doing in the math map, right? How well did we do this? Are there some things that we can celebrate? What are some great conversations that you remember having? And then, right after we've talked about let's assess the teacher and let's talk about this as a family, now we can talk about assessing the student, right? And part of that assessment can be, wherever you want to compare against your goals, but then also saying, okay, well, let's set some specific goals for the second semester. What went well? What would you like to do better? And find 1 or 2 things that each student would like to do better for the second semester as part of that assessment. Is there anybody I missed in our who we should assess?
No, but I agree with Nicole. You're stepping on toes over here. Like, what is happening? it's good, like it's refining us. But I just wanna I don't know, I'm just thinking like, what are my kids gonna say? Is it actually gonna be feedback? Or is it gonna be, you should always give us a snack while we're doing math? Or something like that. Which still could be a good suggestion, right? Because sometimes we are just hangry and we just need something like,
Well, and just remember, right, assessment doesn't always, somebody else's external assessment, even our own assessment, isn't necessarily always accurate, right? So just because your kids say, well, math would have been better if you only made us do half the page. Okay, we can understand why you said that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an accurate assessment, right? Um, I will not lie that I think one of the things that I had to learn as a homeschooling parent was the humility to be wrong in the eyes of my children. Because I know I went into parenting with the idea that, mom's always right. I'm the mom, I get to say what's right, and I'm don't make mistakes, and I'm going to set myself up to be the person who knows everything and is infallible. And I've had to really submit to the spirit and being refined and not being perfect and knowing it all and apologizing for hurting my kids, apologizing for saying things wrong, apologizing for giving people wrong information. Um, that had to be okay to say, I don't know, right? Or I think you know more about this, right? And it's right, it's a pride thing. So yes, it is my own toes that I am stepping on. I just want to be very clear. It is my own toes that I am stepping on. But I think if we want to model for our children self-assessment and humility, that's where it has to start.
Chris, I really appreciate that too, and I probably am the oldest one on this. I think if I had done more of what you just described and been more repentant and given my children specific blocks of time where we discuss things like this, it would have improved our adult relationships too. That they would have known, I mean, my kids can tell me anything, but that doesn't mean they know when to tell it to me or necessarily how to tell it to me. Now that we're more brothers and sisters in Christ rather than mothers and father or mothers and children, because you actually never lose that. So I think it's one part of that long-term planning with our children to be that way. And if you want a good example, if you watch the original black and white Cheaper by the Dozen movie, Mr. Guilford, who really and truly was a person, or Gilbert, who was a real person in real life, they had a home procedure for how children could call meetings and how parents could call meetings and how to practice Robert Rules of Orders and have decorum while they had these meetings. And that is something that's classicalist. We probably should be practicing as adults, but really our focus is always on our children, isn't it?
That's true.
Who gets to be the second? If mom says something, then dad seconds, or dad says like, and how does that work?
Watch the movie, it works. And the thing that's so good about the movie, or even read the book, is actually it mostly failed, but they all knew there was a process to communicate.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
funny.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our what, that's our who, and let's talk for a minute about how to assess. And one thing I really want to stress is that most of our assessment should be informal and ongoing. Right? Blue books should never be a surprise. Your annual testing should never be a surprise. That if you are teaching your children every single day, you know who can add, you know who can sit for more than 5 minutes, you know who can read, you know who doesn't like to read but can, you know who can read the words but not understand it. Right? We know we're always assessing and we're always making those small course corrections. I remember reading, I mean, this is 20 years ago, so I don't remember the context, but it's that idea that when you're driving, right? When you're driving down the road, you're always making these micro course corrections, right? You don't set your tires and just go. You're always micro correcting your route down the road, right? And that's what our homeschool journey should look like, is all these micro corrections that I don't just set autopilot straight ahead and that's it until we hit a blue book and then we make a 90-degree turn, right? So we're making these micro connections. Gosh, you know, you are not picking up these flashcards by just going through them fast every time. So we're going to change this and we're going to read them together and we're going to do copy work and we're going to try some different things, right? We don't just say this is the one way. We're always micro correcting. The formal blue book time or a time of formal assessment, right, is primarily a time to celebrate what is going well, right? Because sometimes in that in ongoing informal assessment, we're like, oh, we're not doing this. We need to, right? We don't always stop and go, wow, you did really well. A lot of the times our everyday path is we've just got to keep the ship going and we're going to keep making these adjustments to keep us getting through. And so having a time that we sit back and we say what went well is really important. So I would argue that that formal assessment, that the most important thing that you can do for your students is to help them celebrate, right, how far they've come in the last 12 to 15 weeks, right? Look at everything we've accomplished. Let's stop and look back and see how we've grown together. It's always an opportunity for a larger course correction. Maybe you realize at the end of 15 weeks, wow, you know, we always got busy and we never looked at the careful calculations page. So let's try and incorporate that, right? Or I can't believe we never thought about using the companion and going back and looking at those narrower domains, or we never used the glossary. So here are some things, here are some chunks of things that we didn't do in the first semester that let's try to incorporate in the second semester. When we do our formal assessment, I think it's important to continue to use the skills of learning. So I mentioned there that chart 15.2 has a list of the skills and it talks about how you can have, right, skills for learning, and then there's ways to assess. Right? So ask your students to name, attend, to recite from memory, to express or tell a story in order to demonstrate things that they know, right? Use common topic questions to assess how well they understand something. It's a time, as Jana pointed out, there's not a lot of times in her students' day where she focuses on how well did you organize your piece of paper. The Blue Book is an opportunity to attend to the arrangement, to the elocution, and to the delivery of student work. Right. So notice that this formal assessment that I'm suggesting that we use here is a little bit less about what math did you learn, right? We're going to assess that when we're using these skills of learning. But just as we've continued to talk about, right? What went well? Where did we discover God this semester? What did you learn? Right? Are there some big chunks that we missed? And then those skills of learning, coming back and continuing not only to assess the skills of learning, but using those skills of learning to assess the math content as well. Any questions? So then finally, let's talk about specifically the math map and assessment. And as you look at the Blue Book, you're going to notice that there are 3 types of paper, and we talk about them in detail in chart 15.3, but these are the basic notes. You're going to see that there are lined pages for composition, and that's where we want to encourage our students to communicate using words and proper math terms. That could be tracing, copywork dictation, or definitions for our younger students. It could be more just definitions and essay questions for our older students. It could also be where some of our students prefer to use lines if they have a multiple step simplification or solving, that they could use the lines to help them keep that neat. We have graph paper. So there's a place to really emphasize orderly and logical arrangement. So that could be, again, those simplifications, those solving equations, those could be done on the lined paper, or they could be done on the graph paper. And of course, it's useful for graphing functions and looking at the behavior of things in the coordinate plane. And then finally, you're going to find in the Blue Book blank pages, which are especially useful for communicating through sketches, drawings, and constructions. So there's 3 different kinds of paper. There's 3 different ways to express our ideas, right? And there's 3 different ways that we can ask our students to share their math ideas. And so we really want to encourage you to use all 3 page types, which means all 3 kinds of questions and assessment when you're looking at your formal assessment with your students. And notice I went ahead and I used the integers pages here because I really wanted to encourage you that you can use the Blue Book with all of your students. It doesn't have to be filled, right? I might not expect my integer student to fill the book, but this is an opportunity to talk to them about what does it mean to write neatly. Even if they just are doing a couple of lines of copy work, right? Or maybe they're just going to trace over a graph or draw a picture with some shapes, right? It doesn't have to be a very formal and formidable type of activity. It can be a gentle activity, but still giving them the opportunity to recognize that this is a place to do neat work, right? That this isn't just, I'm going to draw something quick, but I'm going to do my very best on this. And then to keep this as a record of what they've done. And again, building up to that idea of preparing them for those assessments in challenge where we're trying to get them to be confident in self-assessing. If you're looking for specific questions related to the math content, there are specific questions, and you can see those in chart 15.4. So I would encourage you to look at the charts for lesson 15 and then also the charts for lesson 30. There's a lot of content in 15 and 30 that are going to help you at home to determine what are some ways that I could assess my students. So any other questions on the specific ways that you might assess the math map with the math map content? So that brings us, of course, to our support for our families. Just a reminder that you have the companion, lots of information in there. We continue to add to that. Primarily what we're adding at this point are the video explanations for pages 1 through 4, so that we're staying ahead of where everybody is in community. The forums continue to be a resource, email, your communities, and then of course the book club. We will be covering lessons 16 and 17 in the next 2 weeks. And then we will not be meeting before Thanksgiving. And in December, we will be doing some Q&A sessions. So feel free to send in some questions. We've had a couple of people that have given us some questions that they'd like to go over during that time. And then we will not meet for 2 weeks for Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And so we will pick up with lessons 18 on January the 7th. So we did have somebody send in a question from monomials. So we wanted to go ahead and start here. So looking at monomials, pages 2, 6, 10, and 14, the question was about how do you look at the slope and determine whether the slope is positive or negative and the concavity. So these are both things that we can understand looking at them I'm just making sure that I think I'm
Well,
just turned
first,
on. Yes.
go ahead and explain exactly what you're gonna do, but remember, just remind everybody, this requires you to look back to lesson 9, where we taught how to figure out the slope for lots and lots of problems. So finding one similar there and then looking here would be helpful.
Yes. So we do talk in lesson 9 is where we introduce the idea of slope, and we talk about what the formula for slope is, and we talk about that for straight lines. When we have curved lines, it's a little bit different, and we're going to get into the details of that in lesson 25, where we talk about the derivative. But we're not, in this case here, we are less interested in finding a numerical value for the slope and just understanding, is it going up or is it going down, basically. So when we look at our first example here, okay, and I don't know that I can change from my black, so I apologize that it's black. I don't have my drawing pad with me, so we're going to do the best we can here. If we were to look at this line, yeah, would you say that line is going up or down from left to right?
No, it's constant.
It's constant, right? It's not going up or down. And so we would either say it has no slope or it has zero slope. Zero being its measure, right? But we also sometimes say no slope, and it just means it's not going up or down. So as we look at the next one, so let's now look at our line y equals x, which is our this one here. From left to right, we're always going to be talking about going from left to right, usually. Is our line going up or down?
It's going up.
It's going up. Is up positive or is up usually negative?
Positive.
It's
Positive. So this would have a positive slope because going from left to right, it's going up. So now the reason why I say going from left to right is if we take a minute and think about our formula for slope, if we went back to lesson 9, we would get that we have the change in y over the change in x, right? Or we can see that as our y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. If I'm going from left to right, as I'm going from left to right, do I have a positive change in x or do I have a negative change in x?
positive.
Positive, right? From going left to right, my change in x is always going to be positive. So that's why if we get into the habit of going, looking at it left to right, I can say, well, my bottom is going to be positive. So now I just need to worry about if my y value is going up, I'm going to have a positive slope. If my y value is going down, I'm going to have a negative slope. So now let's look at y equals x squared. This time we need to look, right? You're going to go, why did we do this? Well, because if we look at the left half, right? Let's just look at the left half. So from negative infinity to 0, right? I'm going left to right. My change in x is still positive. What's happening to my y value? Is it going up or is it going down?
It's going up.
So from left to right. So if I go from left to right, if I trace this, right, from left to right, what's happening to my y? Is it going up or down?
Going down.
It's going down. So if my y value is going down, is my slope positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative.
Negative, right? So now let's look on the other half here, right? And I'm still going left to right. So if I was to trace this from left to right, is my y value going up or down?
It's going
It's going up. So is it positive or negative?
be positive.
Positive. So when X was less than 0, my Y value was going down. So it had a negative slope. But on the other side, as X is greater than 0, as I'm going, my Y value is going up. And so I have a positive slope. So now let's look at Y equals X cubed, right? And from on the left-hand side, right, I'm going to trace again, going from left to right. So my X change in X is positive. Is my Y going up or down?
It's going up.
It's going up. So is my slope positive or negative?
That would make it positive.
It would make it positive. Yep. And then this is the fun part, right? Because it's positive, and then we get to 0, and now we're going to look on the other side, still going left to right. Is my Y value going up or down?
Still going up.
Still going up. So is my slope positive or negative?
So it'd be positive as
It'd be
well.
positive. Yep. So even though my Y values were negative, my slope is positive because my curve is going up, right? So I'm not even going to worry about whether I say my Y values are increasing or decreasing. Just looking, this is just looking at the graph. So we're not necessarily worrying about analyzing this arithmetically, which we could do. It's just looking at the graph and saying what's happening to my Y value, right? So going left to right, I know that my change in X is always positive. So now all I have to worry about is my Y value.
Okay, so can I ask a further question about this?
Yep.
That makes sense to me as you describe it to me. And I've been through this before, and I thought I would be okay this year. And that has proven to be untrue. So my question is, can you ask us questions like you are us guiding our child to use our resources to figure this out? Because as you teach us didactically, I love it. It helps me. But then when I'm sitting in front of her, I think I would rather help her learn how to use the resources so that next year, if I'm still stuck, I can guide her through that. Would you
Yeah.
model that for us?
So the first question I would ask you, Nicole, is what is slope? What's the definition of slope?
And then I would go to my charts and find that out, right?
Yeah, if you don't remember that, you might go, I don't know, Mom. Okay, well, do you remember that we done that recently? I don't know. Okay. Well, let's think about this. Is slope something that feels like it's one-dimensional or two-dimensional?
Did you two?
Two. So let's look at the math map and let's look at the lessons that we've done that were in 2D. So this is lesson 11. If we go back and look at the math map, there were only 2 other lessons, right? We talked about straight lines in lesson 9 and we talked about intersected lines in lesson 10. So why don't you go out and pull out booklets 9 and 10 and look in there and see if you can find the word slope,
Okay.
right? So now we've gone and we've found a definition for slope. Do you find right? So what does it mean, right? I might start to say, okay, you're like, well, I don't know, the change in Y and the change in X. Okay, what does that mean? Right? So we might have to stop and ponder, what does that mean? The change in X and the change in Y, or rise over run. What do those words mean
Okay.
to you, right? And so I would ask and let them think through, right? Well, it's how far I moved this way to how far I moved this way. Okay. Well, let's think about positive and negative. And so that's when I might go, okay, look, you've got this equation for, y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1. So if I was to take a point to the right and a point to the left and then subtract them, right? When is my x going to be, right? When is that change positive? So I might just start with that, right? If I'm moving from the left to the right, is my change in X positive? Yes. If I move from the right to the left, is the change in X negative? Yeah. All right. So
Okay,
let's,
so but even still, even that, like, how do I know to ask that question?
Yeah,
But I
so I
mean,
think
obviously I
what's
know now
happening,
because I'm doing
and
this, but
right, and Kirsty, you're making it, super mathematical. You might want to even back up farther, two different ways, Nicole. The one is to go back and look at naturals, and then the second way is to think about, say, let's think about the roads in our neighborhood. When do we go up the hill, and when do we go down the hill? And how do you know it's up, and how do you know it's down? And so, what if it's flat? Like, talk about what they already know, and then start saying, okay, so what's the slope like on these roads? Ah, what if you drew them on a graph paper, the roads? Like that's the thing that's so hard about math curriculum is we have limited paper and an infinite number of ways of applying all of it.
that's true. Okay.
Yeah, so Kirsty was doing a great job, I think, for the student who actually can read the math equations.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not even there yet, you got to back up even more.
Gotcha.
You know.
And
yeah, 'cause-
I keep forgetting about I can go back to the younger ones because I didn't really have the younger ones printed out. So
And Kirsty, those are available on the companion, right? They still can go
yep,
look.
yep, they can go
Yeah.
look. Yep.
Yeah.
Because then you can also say, okay, well, let's just look. So the other thing you could do, right? If you didn't, so I'm showing you like, here's like, if you came from a place of like, okay, I think I've got this. But let's say you're coming from a place of like, I really don't get this. You could also pull out your solutions, right?
Mhm.
Because notice now I know where it's positive and negative. And I could say, okay, well, let's just look and see how does it look? All the places it says it's positive. So right here, I know that everywhere here is positive. This one, oh, it's negative on this side, it's positive on this side. And then this one says the whole thing is positive. So what's different? What's the same for the ones that are
Oh.
positive? What's different for the one that's negative?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's really good, Kirsty. And that's the way that, like, the solution manuals aren't supposed to be there for you just to see if that one answer is correct. It's just practice the whole concept that's on the page.
So that would be another way, right? If you go, I don't know, right? We can always go back, right? So depending on, so I love Lee reminding us, right, that some people are going to be like, yes, we've been doing this. So we can always go back, use our math map, go, where would we find this? You can always look up slope in the companion in the glossary. That's going to be helpful. But then looking here, remember that we want to compare. And so if we don't know what the answer is, don't just necessarily go, the idea isn't to go and copy the answers, right? When we say let your kids copy the answers, we don't mean just copy the answers, but to thoughtfully go, well, why are these all positive and that one's negative? Right?
Got it.
Because
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I think that would help. So let's do that with concavity, right? So let's look at our solutions. And in the first one, it says there's no concavity. In the second one, there's no concavity. But in the third one, the whole thing it says is concave up. So I'm just going to I'm going to put a little up here. But on the next one, on the left-hand side, it was down, but on the right-hand side, it was up. So what do you think is the difference between the parts that are concave up and the part that's concave down? Can you see anything that looks the same or different?
Well, it looks like concave down means it's like going in the direction of an upside down U, and then concave up means going in the direction of a U.
That's
Or like
perfect.
where the curve is either like an upside down U or
Mhm.
a U.
Yeah. Right. So now that may not be our perfect math answer, right? But now, right, if we were to give our students, right, something that looked like this, right? And you said, okay, well, where do you think it's concave up? Well, this part right here looks like a U. Where does it look like it's concave down? Well, this looks like my upside down U, right? That is a great start, right? Because we've used comparison now to look at a pattern. We've made a prediction. We've applied that pattern to somewhere else. And we have time to go. Now we've maybe are going to make this feel a little bit more familiar. We're going to practice it more times. We're going to see this a lot more times. We're just going to become familiar with it looks like a U or it looks like an upside down U. And we have time in the coming years to add the mathematical definition to that. Right. So I would say that what you just did was a great example of using comparison to recognize a pattern and learn something.
Gotcha. And side note, would it be confusing to use the symbols that we're learning, like the intersection and union symbols as a part of this? Is that completely unrelated?
Yeah, they're not related to this. Except that you could say, if your student said, well, the union symbol is concave up and the intersection symbol is concave down, that would be accurate.
Gotcha. That's kind of what I was thinking, but I don't want to
Yeah,
confuse
that you
them.
could do. They're unrelated other than using concavity to describe those.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's very, very helpful.
Andy, I think this was your questions. Does this help you?
Tremendously. Like I watched the video and I'm like, okay, but like especially the line, understanding that you could go the other way and it'd be left and down, but that would both be negative, so the negatives would make a positive. But I would just it wasn't until I got to like the parabola, I was like, I don't understand.
But yeah,
But
that's
now I
exactly,
do.
yeah. Good, yay.
And I love, Nicole, thank you for asking the question, like, how do you do this for your child too? Because it is too easy to be like, oh, well, this is why, rather than, okay, so what do we know? How can we build from that? I love that. Thank you, Nicole.
Are there any other questions? So just for those parents who are watching, just wanted to let you know that this was a question that was sent in to us via email so that we were prepared to talk about this on our call, because the end of our calls are always here to address the questions that you have. That could be mathematical, it could be, as Nicole said, right? Well, how do we do this classically? And so if you're watching this, you're not live with us and you're watching this, I really want to encourage you to send your questions in, because we are happy to answer them. And then you can go and see how they've been answered. So this was here because it was a question sent in by a parent, and we're really happy to be able to answer that. So are there any other questions?
That was my
All
only
right.
one I had. So
Well, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We have finished our first semester, so we're halfway through our year. And so next week, as I mentioned, next week we're going to start lessons 16 and 17. So for those of you who are watching these and trying to stay ahead at home, we'll have 16 and 17 finished before the break, and then we'll pick up with 18 in January. So we will look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much.
you.